The email from my cousin, Mark, had a subject line that read, "Remember that old house?" And my heart did a little jump. I hadn't thought about that place in years, not since the summer of '05, the one where we learned a ghost story isn't just a campfire tale. It was the summer we were 16, full of that cocky invincibility that only teenagers have. We spent our days biking around our small town, getting into harmless trouble, and mostly just being bored. But we had a goal that summer, to explore the old Blackwood place. It was a decrepit Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, famous for being haunted. The story went that a man named Silas Blackwood had gone mad and murdered his entire family there before hanging himself in the master bedroom. Nobody had lived in it since. We had scoped it out a few times but never worked up the nerve to go in. One sweltering August night, as the humidity clung to us like a second skin, we decided this was it. We grabbed flashlights, a can of Coke each, and our bikes, and we set off. The moon was a sliver of white in a sky choked with thick, dark clouds. The house was even more imposing up close. The porch sagged like an old man's shoulders, and the windows, dark and empty, looked like blind eyes staring into the night. A few boards were missing from the porch steps, and a faint, musty smell of decay and damp wood hung in the air. We pushed open the front door, and it let out a long, groaning shriek that made the hair on my arms stand up. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Dust motes danced in the beams of our flashlights. The furniture was still there, draped in white sheets that looked like ghostly figures frozen in time. The silence in the house was heavy, a suffocating blanket that muffled our whispers. We walked from room to room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, seeing old portraits with cracked glass, a grand piano with yellowing keys, and a dining room table still set for a meal that would never be eaten. We were making a lot of noise, giggling nervously, trying to convince ourselves this was just a game. Mark was brave, or at least he pretended to be. "See? Nothing here," he said, kicking a loose floorboard. But I saw the way his flashlight beam trembled. Then we got to the staircase. It was a massive, sweeping thing leading up into the blackness. The top of the stairs was shrouded in a shadow so deep, it seemed to absorb the light from our flashlights. Mark and I exchanged a look. This was the moment, the final boss of our little adventure. We started up the stairs, each step a loud crack in the oppressive silence. We reached the second floor, and a long hallway stretched before us, lined with closed doors. At the end of the hall was the master bedroom, the one where Silas Blackwood was said to have killed himself. As we walked, our flashlights sweeping back and forth, I saw a door halfway down the hall. That was slightly ajar. I stopped. "Did we do that?" I whispered. Mark shook his head, his face pale in the light of his flashlight. We stood there, our hearts pounding, listening. Nothing, just the sound of our own panicked breathing. We got to the end of the hall, the master bedroom door looming before us. Mark grabbed the handle, and a sudden, sharp, metallic screech ripped through the silence as he tried to open it. It was locked. Mark jiggled the handle a few more times, his frustration palpable. "This is stupid," he muttered. "Let's just go." I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost sagged against the wall. We turned and started back down the hall, our footsteps a little faster this time. That's when we heard it, from behind us, the sound of a door slowly, deliberately creaking open. We froze. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The sound had come from that half-open door we had passed. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were glued to the floor. Mark slowly turned around, his flashlight shaking so badly the beam bounced off the walls like a frantic, trapped moth. The door was now wide open, a gaping black maw in the wall, and standing in the doorway wasn't a sheet or a shadow or anything we could explain away. It was a man. He was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like old faded clothes. His skin was the color of a moonlit grave, and his eyes were two pits of empty darkness. But the most terrifying thing was that he didn't move. He just stood there staring at us. He was too real to be a ghost, but too unreal to be alive. I swear on my life he looked at us, and a slow, sorrowful smile stretched across his face, a smile that was all wrong. It was a smile of pure, agonizing sadness. Then he raised a hand, and slowly he pointed at Mark. Mark let out a small, choked gasp, and his flashlight clattered to the floor, plunging us into total darkness. In that split second, I heard a whisper in the darkness, a voice that was as old as the house itself. It was a raspy, pained whisper that said a single word: "Help." That was the last straw. A guttural scream ripped from my throat, and I took off, barreling down the hallway, not caring about the stairs or the doors or anything. Mark was right behind me, his frantic footsteps pounding on the old wood floors. We didn't stop until we were out of the house, out of the yard and back on our bikes, pedaling as fast as our legs could carry us. We didn't talk about it for a long, long time. Not until the other day, with that email from Mark. It just said, I went back to the Blackwood place. I stood in the yard and a single light was on in the master bedroom. I haven't responded yet. Part of me wants to tell him to stay away, that some doors are meant to be locked. But another part of me, the part that still hears that whispered word in the dark, knows that the memory of that night will never leave us, and some things once seen can never be unseen. Mark didn't stop emailing. His messages became more frequent, more desperate. He'd gone back, and this time he'd heard more than just a light. He claimed the man was talking to him, a low, constant hum of sorrow that he couldn't shake. The man's name was indeed Silas, and he wasn't a monster. The help wasn't for himself. It was a warning. Mark, against my panicked pleas, began to research Silas Blackwood. The old town records, the dusty archives, told a different story. Silas hadn't killed his family. He had been a kind but broken man. His wife, Abigail, had been a beautiful but sickly woman. His 2 children, a boy and a girl, had died in a fire that had broken out in the house's master bedroom. The story had been twisted over time. Silas hadn't murdered them. He had been trying to save them. The fire had started accidentally. He had managed to get his children out, but his wife had been trapped. He had gone back for her, a frantic, desperate rescue attempt that had ended in a locked door and 2 graves. A door that was now forever ajar in the house's memory. Silas's death had been from the smoke. The town, in their grief and ignorance, had turned his tragedy into a dark tale. The truth was, Silas was still trying to save his family. Mark was obsessed now. He spent every night at the Blackwood place, sitting in the darkness, talking to the house, to the ghost. He told me he understood the sorrow now. Silas wasn't a malevolent spirit. He was just a heartbroken man, a protector who had failed, and in failing had become trapped. I finally gave in. The stories were too much. Mark's increasingly unhinged emails. The weight of a 15-year-old secret. One night I drove out there. The house looked even more imposing in the dark, a black silhouette against the starlit sky. I saw a small glow from the second story, the master bedroom. My heart sank. Mark was inside. I walked up the creaking porch steps, the old door groaning open for me. The air was cold, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt heavy with a profound, aching sadness. I found Mark in the master bedroom, his flashlight on the floor, its beam pointing at a half-open window. He was standing there, staring at a small, charred spot on the wall. He was crying. I can see it, he whispered, his voice cracking. The fire. The smoke. He's here. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The room was empty, yet it was full of a presence so overwhelming, it was hard to breathe. I saw it then too. A flicker, a translucent shape of a man kneeling, his arms outstretched as if reaching for something. His eyes were no longer pits of darkness. They were filled with a burning, desperate love. He was reaching for 2 small, translucent figures standing near the window. His children, and then I saw her. A figure, pale and ethereal, standing in the doorway, her hand on the doorknob. His wife, Abigail. She was smiling, a sad, gentle smile.
He's been trying to get them out, Mark whispered.
A tear-streaked smile on his face. But he can't. Not alone. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked from the wife to the husband to the children. The room was no longer cold. It was filled with a soft, warm light that seemed to pulse with love and grief, and in that light the figures began to glow. Abigail, with a final loving look at her husband, turned and pushed the door open. A soft click echoing through the room. Silas turned from his children, his face a mixture of fear and relief. The children, as if seeing their mother for the first time in years, reached out. And then, in a single breathtaking moment, the 3 of them coalesced, their ghostly figures shimmering, and then, with a final silent farewell, they stepped through the open door and vanished. The light went with them. The room was dark but no longer cold. The house was empty. The weight of sorrow that had clung to it for a century was gone. Mark and I stood in the silence, our flashlights now a stark, sterile light in a room that was just a room, a dusty, old, dilapidated bedroom. Nothing more. We never went back. The house was sold a few years later. The new owners, a young couple with 2 children, renovated it. They say it has a beautiful, sun-drenched master bedroom with a view of the garden. They have no idea about the family that once lived there, or the man who finally found his way home.